I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Planning Commission meeting for June 20th, 2017. The first on our agenda tonight is to adopt the agenda. Ben, do we have any additions or revisions?
The only revision that I'll ask from the Planning Commission later on this evening is item E. I will be asking to have tabled. The draft document that was included as an attachment was not the correct one, so we'll end up talking about that item at a future meeting.
Okay.
Otherwise, the rest of the agenda is fine as written.
Sounds good. With that, I move that we adopt the agenda as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We will proceed accordingly. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the May 16th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. Anybody have any adjustments or additions? No? I didn't either, so I'll go ahead and move that we approve the minutes of the May 16th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Next, we have new business and several items tonight, but we're going to start with item A, the Waterford Landing final plat. Ben, are you going to walk us through this one?
I am. So I hope it hasn't been too long. The Planning Commission should recall this project. Before we get into some of those details, just to remind anyone, any of the residents that have been involved, kind of where we are in the process. This project came before the Planning Commission last year, actually, as a sketch plat, and then followed up. It was actually one of the first meetings in January this year that there was consideration for the rezoning, the conditional use permit to allow for a plan unit development, as well as the preliminary plat approval. After being reviewed by the Planning Commission, they did go to the following City Council meeting and did receive approval of those very same items on January 23rd. So tonight we have the final plat. There's some supplemental documentation that's been included as part of that final plat that just kind of reinforces whether or not the developer was able to develop or propose to develop the property in conformance with the approved preliminary plat and zoning of the property. And we'll get into kind of what may have changed slightly from preliminary plat to final plat as we go through the rest of the presentation. So to remind everyone of what property we're talking about, you see on the left is just an outline of the property. The two primary roads you're seeing, Highway 7, which will serve as the primary access as it does today into the property, and then the other street extending south from Highway 7 is Rolling Acres Road, County Road 13. Property is guided for low density development, which has that range of 1.5 to 5.9 units per acre. As identified during the preliminary plat, and it's been verified through final plat, there's approximately 17.5 acres of developable property on the site. And then based upon the 32 units that were approved as the preliminary plat that you now see on final plat, approximately 2.4 units per acre is the proposed density there. The final plat that was included as an attachment on tonight's agenda is shown here. All of the 32 lots arranged very similar to what had been shown with the preliminary plat. Outlot A, and I apologize, the orientation is flipped, so north is on our left. Outlot A has two different wetlands within it. It also is a property that contains the proposed stormwater management facility located just next to lot 11 of block 2 where my cursor is right now. Outlot C, also proposed to be dedicated to the city, contains some wetland buffer area. There's a wetland on the adjacent property to the east of this site. Contains that wetland buffer, but also is the location where a new lift station would be constructed to replace the existing one that serves the properties east of this, as well as had contemplated serving this property. The current lift station's been in place for a significant period of time and is not able to accommodate the additional 32 lots. So as part of this project, the developer will be constructing the brand new lift station and then looking at removing the existing, but all of the same properties end up being served by this new location. Outlot B had quite a bit of discussion during preliminary plat. This is a lot that will be retained by the ownership of the Homeowners Association of Waterford Landing. It also provides between lot 16 of block 1 and lot 1 of block 3, an access route to get to Schutz Lake. There had also been a proposal that's been carried through the final construction plans of having some improvements down close to the lake, kind of as a private park type setting for residents of Waterford Landing. This provides for that riparian access for those homeowners association residents to provide a dock and one pontoon boat, as was approved with the zoning or the plan unit development of this project. At this stage, we're also verifying that their landscaping plan is in general conformance with what they had put together at the preliminary plat stage. A final landscaping plan had been included in the construction plans that were attached to tonight's agenda item for this. This is just an identification of where those plantings are proposed to go. You can see near the entry to the site, so again, north being on the left-hand side, the access into the property from Highway 7, reinforcing kind of that buffering from Highway 7 to cut down on noise, but also create kind of a nice entry into the project. One thing I would note is that this plan does not show the significant number of existing trees that will remain around the periphery of the project. So even though you're seeing kind of a clustering of trees and landscaping near the entrance, that kind of buffer, if you will, is continued on throughout the outlots on the adjoining sides of those plantings. And then just the individual planting per lot and unit throughout the project is what you see illustrated. And then outlot C, again, another buffer area just transitioning between the property ownership to the east of this project and Waterford Landing, the homes within the site itself. At this time, I'm happy to go through any further details. Hopefully the staff report provided a good summary of kind of what had been looked at preliminary plat and the zoning and what's been verified and done as part of final plat.
Kind of just a question, comment. Comment mostly being the fact, I really appreciate you including written text, the reports from the other jurisdictions. Sometimes just hearing it isn't enough, but seeing that and seeing there's an official report and something logged on to our or your staff report really helps as a planning commissioner, so I appreciate that. Sure. And with that being said, was there anything that was negative? Because that was the number one concern of the residents around the lake. Yep. Was the end water quality, and that was important.
Correct. It did receive a confirmation letter from Minnehaha Creek, who I would say was the agency that a lot of the residents had most concern with, making sure that the stormwater management met all the rules and that things like wetland impacts were being mitigated and being cognizant of what kinds of erosion could happen during construction, as well as just this project building out. I did receive a letter from Minnehaha Creek yesterday confirming that they have, that the developer has submitted plans that address all of their rules. So aside from the DNR, who had also reviewed the PUD previously, they've given a final letter stating that this abides by the DNR's requirements for PUDs in a shoreline overlay district. MnDOT, as noted in the staff report, has reviewed a 90% complete plan set. That's just where they are in the state's process for reviewing improvements to the state highway system. We anticipate the 100% complete set will get reviewed in the timing sequence that the state has established by August. So you'll see that as a condition in the resolution of recommendation that's drafted and attached tonight. And then the MAC Council had also previously been made aware of this project and verified that it does meet any obligation the city has for guided density of this property.
Very good. I think that's important to show, to have written down and in the agenda for people to see, because we wanted to make sure that was a concern and the citizens were being taken care of at that point, because that was their concern. And I also like some of the notes in there from the watershed district that the current stormwater retention stuff is much more strict than it was when Swiss Mountain in 2008-7 was installed. Yeah, and so that was a big point that some of the residents brought up, and I'm glad we have a more updated and qualified system being installed.
I'll second Todd's comment in the aspect of it. It was actually a nice addition this time to the report regarding the other jurisdictional review status. Might be a good idea to consider going forward for those developments that have shoreline impacts. I don't think we've traditionally done that, but it's given good context, I think, to this process going forward. Ben, I thought that was a good overview and report. I was wondering if you had planned on highlighting any of the conditions. I thought you did a nice job in the staff report of updating the status of the 13 conditions that were placed on the preliminary plat.
Yep, and I did basically keep them in the resolution of recommendation that's attached to the agenda tonight. Reworded them slightly, just more as an insurance that yes, the development is going to abide by these various conditions. But the first one that's noted on the screen in front of you, just entering into a development agreement that covers all of the obligations of the developer. Number two, that all the lots need to abide by the approved PUD for the project that was adopted under Ordinance 413. Number three, any permits and approvals from other applicable agencies. We just walk through what those other agencies are and where they are, either in securing those approvals or in process of getting those approvals. Number four just kind of reinforces that specific access into the site, getting approvals from MnDOT. I would note that would be probably the biggest change that occurred, and not necessarily at the specific request of the developer from preliminary plat, but as the state got into its review of what a turn lane construction might be, they requested that the design accommodate a full access into and out of the site. So there is a same left turn into the site as you would have seen at preliminary plat, but there's also a left turn out with an acceleration lane that's in alignment with the left turn into the site. So it's a little bit different arrangement than what we'd see locally, but something that MnDOT has done in several other areas on on state highways previously. 5 is pretty standard of all development, just making sure that the final engineered plans and specifications get approved by the city engineer. 6 talks about the 2 outlots that I described earlier, Outlot A and Outlot C being dedicated to the city, Outlot B being retained by the homeowners association, and that a conservation easement be provided around Outlot B. They have provided an exhibit and description of that conservation easement. And that will get recorded at the same time as the final plat and be in effect to preserve as much of that Outlot B as possible. Draft set of covenants that have spoken with the developer. They're in the process of finalizing those, but basically the key conditions that needed to be addressed here are conditions of final plat, proposed final plat approval. Things like having the fertilizers being sensitive to the fact that they're in close proximity to the lake, and managing things like the one pontoon boat, one boat launch, those types of things that were sensitive to this project. Number 9 specifically talks about the access that a subdivision has to Schutz Lake, being the one pontoon boat. And the one launch that has no hard surface improvements. It doesn't need to be an emergency rescue kind of launch, which had previously been considered. So it's supposed to be a low impact access to the lake, which would be very similar to what some of the other property owners have on Schutz Lake today.
Can you advance your slide one more page?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
And then 10, just being consistent with installation of landscaping that conforms with the final landscaping plan. Parkland dedication is number 11. 12 is just being cognizant of the fact that there are bluffs and bluff impact zones on the property, that they're abiding by those. And then 13, if you recall, one of the final items that had been discussed here that was talked much more extensively at the council level at preliminary plat was making sure that the rear yard areas had some kind of treatment before just allowing runoff to leave the site and head towards the lake or the adjoining wetland.
Thank you. That was helpful, just to understand where we stand with those. And those are the same conditions that were attached to the preliminary plat that we're intending to carry forward with the
Correct.
approval of the final plat?
The wording of them is identical to what the council approved on January 23rd. Some of the wording changed a little bit from planning commission to council just based upon council's discussion, but what you're seeing tonight is identical to the language that the council approved.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Nothing over here.
Ben, with this being the final plat, I mean, this really does boil down to what are those things that have changed in the proposal since approval of the preliminary plat, right? And so primarily it's access to the development on Highway 7. Any other major changes that?
No, I think the layout very consistent. If we were to match up property lines for the 32 lots to what was shown in preliminary plat, might have been a few very minor tweaks just as they got into construction aspect of where things needed to reside. But generally those are consistent. The only other thing that would have just been refined because of where they were in designing the project was those rear yards drainage swales just are designed to do what they need to do, and all of that rear yard fescue stripping has been done and provided in those final construction plans as well.
Well, I think I'm ready to make a motion unless anybody else had any other questions or comments before we go forward.
No.
Okay, I want to go ahead and move that we approve resolution number 17-6, which is a resolution recommending approval of a final plat for Waterford Landing as submitted by Casco Ventures LLC with the conditions as noted in the resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
This will move forward, and I understand, Ben, that based on some of the timing of the follow-up with one of the jurisdictions, this won't go before council until the July 10th.
Correct. And just the way that the planning commission dates lined up, this was the first available planning commission meeting to still meet a July 10th council approval. That was the only reason for kind of the lag time. So there is a public comment period through Minnehaha Creek Watershed District that started today, will end on July 3rd. And I understand they're working to try to set up more of a neighborhood meeting for any of the residents around the lake that want to just understand more about what that stormwater management plan is. And we're waiting for that comment period to end before the project goes to council.
Sounds good. Thank you. So we will move on to the next item under new business, item B, which is the Meadows of Wasserman Lake, the preliminary plat, including a public hearing and rezoning. Turn it back over to you, Ben.
Sure. So similar to what we just talked about with Waterford Landing, it typically hit on process for any resident that this may be the first time that they've sat through a development coming near them. This project had a sketch plat that had been reviewed a couple months ago by the Planning Commission and City Council. The point of that process was really just to garner feedback on where the developer had been and thinking about what could happen with the property. One of the unique things that you'll see from this project as well as the Hill Point agenda item tonight is these are the first two projects that have been designed to meet our new residential zoning districts. This particular property had been made aware just before they came to the Planning Commission that R2 was a thing for us. So they did kind of get into what do these new R2 provisions require, and then kind of made some modifications to their project accordingly. So tonight you're looking at a rezoning. This property today is zoned agriculture, and they're looking at proposing to rezone to R2, and I'll get into some of the details of what that means. And then they're also looking for a preliminary plat for the meadows at Wasserman Lake. One thing that is on the next agenda item that I don't want to forget, so I'm going to talk about because they're related. You will see a request for final plat approval of a different project name. It's the same preliminary plat area, but there are 8 lots that already have services to them that are directly across from Wasserman Lake Woods. So you'll see the final plat is Wasserman Lake Woods second edition, and I'll explain a little bit more as we get into the presentation. So tonight, considering rezoning, so checking based upon our new R2 provisions, does this conform with those zoning? And similar to the conversation that was had at the sketch plat, there are some areas where it's adjacent to existing development that the developer has accommodated similar lot sizes, so we aren't just drastically transitioning from larger lots to smaller lots quickly. But that's generally what we're looking at for the rezoning and preliminary plat at this stage.
And before we move on,
Yep.
just because we're talking about process, do you mind if I clarify the public hearing tonight? So for those in the audience who have an interest in sharing some feedback or comments, with it being a public hearing, Ben is going to walk through the staff report. The commission will then have a general discussion. Then I'll open up the public hearing, and you're welcome to come up and state your name and address on the podium and share any comments or ask any questions that you may have. I'll then close the public hearing for further discussion among the commission, and then we'll decide which action to take from there. So it's always good background for those who are new to the process.
Yes.
And with that, I'll turn it back over to you for the staff report.
Thanks. So the property we're looking at today, outlined in orange on the screen before you, the road on the south side of the outlined property is Marsh Lake Road. On the north side, Lakeside Drive, and you can see the outline of lots that are in Laketown 9th edition. So the elementary school sits just off the east side of this slide. 2 existing property developments that this project lives next to. Lakeside Estates is a Pulte subdivision that they've built out. And then Wasserman Lake Woods that I referred to earlier sits just to the north of this site in the area that I'm outlining with the cursor. So thinking about slightly larger context and how this fits into it, you can see the yellow area is generally the lots being proposed tonight. There's a substantial wetland that is included on this property that is shown in an outlot. There was an upland area that was talked a little bit about when this project came forward as a sketch plat. That outlot is being reserved by the developer and would only get developed at such time as the adjoining properties develop and bring utility and other infrastructure to that site. In addition to the lots as they're arranged, this project had always been targeted as seeing parkland dedication being made as land. So an expansion of Lakeside Estates Park, you can see that existing park improvements on the aerial here. A little over 3 acres being dedicated as part of this project, and some in-kind contributions for improvements going into that park that I'll highlight here in a minute. So zooming a little bit closer in, and I know you can't read the lot and block numbers on this one. I have another slide for that. Woods Drive, that is this north-south connection that extends into this site, is being renamed through this project. Part of that is because Woods Drive today loops all the way around, so from an addressing standpoint, we'd be back at the same addressing number sequence, so having the same name was going to be very confusing, so that's the reason for the name change. Isabel Drive, that's just kind of a short street stub on the west side of the project, has 3 lots that are served from it today. That will be extended and then wrap through the project and resolve back at the north-south street in the site. And then another east-west connection being made, providing access to all the lots within the development. The park itself had been identified as potentially having a parking lot. This dark gray line that you see here is an access point for vehicles heading towards a parking lot. Thinking about parkland dedication, that is one improvement that the developer would be looking at making to satisfy the remainder of the dedication requirements that aren't being satisfied through land. So that access drive will be there day one with the lots on either side, so that it's not a question if the city was to come in later and construct a parking lot, that it had always been planned to have some kind of public access in between those two lots. The other dark line that you can see extending through the park and between some lots is a sidewalk or trail access. So we have sidewalk proposed on both sides of the streets throughout the project. This provides a direct access into the park and ties into the existing pedestrian ways throughout the existing portion of the park. This one hopefully is a little bit easier to see. So we have 7 total blocks of lots throughout the site. Block 7, are the 8 lots that already have services to them. So there's no other public improvements that really need to be made for those to be developed. That's why you have a request for consideration of final plat after this agenda item tonight. Because they are consistent with the preliminary plat being proposed, and because they are already served, they can be platted and allow for development to take place on those properties. Included as part of your packet, you'll see that there's 2 different builders that are looking to build out this subdivision, Pulte Homes and Country Joe Homes, and I believe we have representation from both of those builders here tonight. All of the blocks, with the exception of Block 6 at this point, are proposed to be built out by Pulte Homes, and Block 6, that has all of the lots on the east side of the north-south street into the site and back to the wetland, would be built out by Country Joe Homes. Utilities, so the majority of the site from a stormwater perspective drains from west to east and heads into a filtration system before it's daylighted and outletted into the wetland and creek, 6 Mile Creek, that heads north into Wasserman Lake. There's a small portion, primarily block 2 and 3 on the west side of the site, that generally funnels north also, but then would tie into the existing stormwater infrastructure that's in Lakeside Estates on the west side of the site. Sanitary and water will be extended through all of the streets. There aren't any trunk mains going through this project because we're not trying to feed or loop a larger system into this project. So all of those are pretty standard infrastructure just to serve this project. I would note there will be a stubbing to the plat boundary, so that adjacent parcel that had been ghost platted when this project was reviewed at sketch plat, that could be developed in the future at such time as that property owner decided to move forward. From a landscaping perspective, this landscaping plan represents the changes that were recently adopted to our landscaping and open space section. So you'll see along Marsh Lake Road a fairly significant landscape and berming buffer between the road and the park. Boulevard trees being incrementally spaced along all streets within the development, and then 3 trees per lot is what's represented. So you're seeing kind of at least 1 tree that's placed in the front yard and then 1 in the rear yard, with some consideration where some clustering may occur adjacent to other projects, particularly on the west side of the site that had been shown at the time of the sketch plat. Included in the staff report that's identified on this screen is a comparison between what those R2 regulations require of this type of site, looking for a zoning change to R2, and what the actual variances are within the project from meeting those minimums to kind of the larger or where they're exceeding more some of the minimum requirements of that zoning district. Happy to come back to this slide if you have any questions about those. And as I had mentioned before, there were examples of the home types that would be proposed by the two builders. So this slide representing those home types that Pulte would intend to build throughout the project. And then this slide identifying those possible building plans that Country Joe has available that would fit in the context of those lots being proposed. At this point in time, I don't have any other specific information. I'd be happy to answer any questions. As noted before, we have the developer represented here to answer any questions, as well as the two home builders if you have any questions for them.
Thanks, Ben. Any initial thoughts or questions?
Looking at the preliminary plat, the future plat, the ghost plat that we had looked at originally on the sketch plat, is that road going to be at least temporarily installed, or is the only access to this development way to the west on Marsh Lake Road?
So this project, let's go out a little bit. So Lakeside Drive comes out to Marsh Lake Road. That would be one point of access, and then there's technically two coming from the east. So Red Fox Drive goes out to County Road 11, and then you could also come Hackmore Drive to Field and Martingale to get to the site as well.
So to get to that ballpark, it's a public ballpark within a neighborhood. If somebody
Correct.
from this part of town has to get there, they have to drive through a lot of neighborhood, a lot of residential neighborhoods to even get to that park. It's not very accessible for anyone except for the people that live there. Was that the intent, or was that, I mean, do we find that fairly common?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly common. If you think about Lake Bridge, it's a park that's served at the far west side of that development. Again, it's intended to be a neighborhood park, so the general users within there are usually coming from the immediate subdivisions surrounding it. So although you could program that ball field for practice, it's not necessarily going to be a competition type field. As an example, where someone's going to go and hold some kind of tournament there. So I don't see that as being a primary concern. And we did have both our public works and fire departments review that access management. So this route of cutting through kind of that future parcel that this project adjoins is in alignment and meets the spacing guidelines both for the county and what both departments would ultimately need, but both said based upon general operations day to day, they're comfortable seeing the accesses that are available as the project sits here.
Okay. That was my concern on that, so it's.
And so there's a park plan, right, Ben, that it's a park master plan that identifies which of those parks are identified to be community parks. Neighborhood parks, that's the term I was thinking, as opposed to those parks which serve the broader region.
Correct.
And have different sets of access and parking and those types of things.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I realize we have one of those that we're generally updating. It's just the times change, and some of the older neighborhoods don't have that little neighborhood park.
Sure.
So they have to go to a general park and possibly this park too. So we got to think of that in the whole context of what was here before we started this park program and everything too, so for access. But
Can I stay on that topic since since you started with the park?
absolutely.
Ben, when I look at the access, this is somewhat of a unique opportunity that we're planning ahead and getting the access in place for the city to come back and develop the parking later. And the way that access road is configured, I'm wondering, can you go back to the planting plan?
Yep.
I'm wondering if it wouldn't make sense if now's the time to anticipate, you can imagine as people are leaving the park, evening hours,
Yep.
headlights right in the back of that homeowner, that lot number 7. If some additional planning kind of around that bend. You could imagine also in the future with development in the opposing area, if that makes good sense, to think about some landscaping that provides some buffer to that access road.
One of the things I'd just clarify from a timing perspective, so you're seeing the outline of a ball field and parking shown here. Those were concepts that were developed by our park planner, but they're not something that's in our CIP for immediate construction. So there would be an additional landscaping plan that would come along with a more refined or final park layout and design, and those types of things would certainly be part of the conversation once that were to occur. So
Okay.
the landscaping that you're seeing here, all good thoughts, and I'm happy to pass those along to our parks director, but something that would likely occur in the future, as this just address our zoning requirements for buffering adjacent to roadways and general planting within the project.
Hey, Ben, is there any plan in place to mitigate or help ease the, I guess, inherent dangers of all the construction traffic flowing through those existing neighborhoods rather than having access off of more of a main road?
Yeah, as part of our process of going through final plat and doing final construction drawings, we'll have a more deliberate conversation with the developer about what are those access routes for various types of construction, because you're right, most people, even if they are moving into a development that's still building out, get certainly frustrated when there's contractor after contractor that are around there, and we're cognizant of that. We're also aware that Marsh Lake Road is not to a condition where it can support all the construction traffic, so we will have to have a fairly deliberate plan for how to get the different trades in there, particularly when we get to home construction.
Okay.
Another quick question for you, Ben. We may talk about this a little bit more because it's related to the final plat, but with the 8 lots to the north being considered under final plat, is it safe to assume that they will proceed earlier in terms of the construction sequence and phasing?
Correct. I think the intent there is that they do any of there's some existing trees that are on those sites that would need to get removed to allow for the construction, but generally there's not a lot of grading that would need to be done for those basically pads to be ready. So those would probably be the first thing to be done after final plat is approved. And because the utilities are already there, there's not a ton of work in general before you start to see home construction. And I do believe one of these lots has been targeted as a potential model site. So you could see that happening very early on in the process.
Okay. One nice advantage of that is that it does create a natural buffer in terms of, there's priority to developing those 8 homes. It'll create a natural buffer to the existing neighborhood across the street, as the rest of the development, I assume, will follow soon after, pending final approval, but it's good. Any other observations or questions before we open up for discussion, public hearing?
Nothing else from me.
All right, with that, I will go ahead and open the public hearing. If anybody has any comments, questions, feedback for the group, we'd certainly happy to hear your feedback. We just ask that you step to the podium and state your name and address and share your thoughts.
Hi, my name is Lara Sexton. I live at 9175 Lakeside Drive. I'm in the Pulte neighborhood on Lakeside Drive, so you can actually see my lot on this map. My concern is, of course, the access. I have 3 small children, and we live on the south side, and there's not a sidewalk. We have to cross to the north side to get to a sidewalk. So with all the traffic, currently there's a lot of construction traffic still. To add 88 more lots and all the cars that are going to be coming and going is really concerning. And so I just wonder why we can't have an immediate access out of that Lot 7. If there's a reason why that's not included, I know that was kind of discussed earlier. And I'm just concerned that, you know, there is the access, but that's future planning and we don't know when that's going to be. So that's kind of my questions or thoughts. I don't know if there's a reason why there can't be one out of Lot 7 to Marsh Lake. Be next to the park.
Sure. Do you want me to answer it?
Or
If you would,
Sure. So when this site had been evaluated for this general proposal, the developer had worked with the adjacent property owner that owns that piece that's not being developed today.
Yep.
At the same time, we're going through preliminary design on Marsh Lake Road, and the county has spacing guidelines.
Okay.
And in order to best serve both properties and meet those spacing guidelines, the access through that future property was what ultimately was identified as being acceptable with the county.
Okay.
I would say we're, at a staff level, we'll be monitoring what kind of transportation and traffic changes happen when Lakeside Drive gets completed
Right.
later this year.
Yep.
For what that does for how traffic flows in there. I know there's been a number of residents, and maybe you're one of them, that have asked things like, when could stop signs go
Yes.
in, if those are possible? Those are all things that we'll continue to evaluate once we have that new access or connection.
Okay. Okay. I just want to bring my concerns up.
To your point, as far as adding a temporary access road along that baseball field, there is a resident on the south side of the road there that has put up with this construction for, well, he's lived there 25, 30 years.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I don't think they'd appreciate that, an access point there either.
Right.
They have enough trouble with people coming up the dirt road when they're
Yep.
supposed to come in the asphalt portion of it off of 43.
Right. I can
And
understand that.
between that road and his 3 children and dogs, and he's probably had enough too, and he's on the
Right.
same pace with you.
Right.
I was looking at the ghost lot, but now that I remember that, that's a pasture of his for his horses, and it has a steep slope down towards the creek. You couldn't, it would take thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a temporary road in there, so that's not feasible either, so. There's just no solid solution for a temporary
Sure.
access to that.
Do we have any idea the timeline in the future?
I know that property owner hasn't committed to anything, but it wouldn't surprise me if shortly after Marsh Lake Road is constructed, once that
Okay.
final thing is done, that there's probably some more incentive, I guess,
Sure.
for that to move on, because I believe it's just a property that would be purchased to hold.
Yep. Okay.
And I agree with the homeowner. I don't like the idea of not having that access there. That's the first thing that bothered me when I saw this.
And and it's hard since there isn't a sidewalk on our side of the street. I mean, there's several children that cross. So just to kind of keep that in mind, that's very concerning for all of us that live, especially along Lakeside Drive. And with the park being there, there's a lot of kids that walk through the neighborhood and the neighborhood pool. So just to kind of keep all that in mind.
yeah.
That's-
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, looking at the total number of lots, what was it, 80, where did I see it? 88?
It's 87, yeah. There were 88 proposed in the sketch plat. Through going through some of the revisions, they lost a lot.
So times that by 2 vehicles at least, that's a lot more cars going down that one road when this is developed. It just doesn't seem like good strategy overall for traffic management, to me. It's not my specialty, traffic management, obviously, but I live in the neighborhood too, and I don't know if I want 175 more cars 3 times a day coming down my road also.
Can I just address that?
Sure.
real quick? Just so we don't forget, the connection to the east is going to be completed too. So the day that happens, probably more than 50% of the traffic will be reduced right then. from the existing condition, because everybody's going to want to go east. So I think that's going to help. So I just want to make sure we remember that part of it. So, thanks.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Anybody else? Yep.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Hallis. I live on 5760 Marsh Lake Road. I've been involved in this project for several years, working in tandem with Ben and Kara and the mayor and the council. And I have put up for several years with traffic on Marsh Lake Road to build the new neighborhood. So I hear where you're coming from. I really do. If anybody does, it's me as a mom and a pet owner and a walker and et cetera. And I have a couple of things I would just like to say. I think it's really important as a city to be considerate of all the residents adjoining and abutting this property that we're gonna develop. And I say that because I sat in my living room and watched construction cars all hours of the day speed down the road. However, I do know now we have a 35-mile-an-hour speed sign in the middle of the road going west that I think needs to be put closer toward the intersection of 11 and 43 where the Schmieg Farm is, because we're having some issues with traffic speeding there and why stopping in the middle of the road, but that's something else. But what I want to say is I think it's really important that we send the message to our construction partners that they need to be observant of the rules that the city puts in place and be considerate to the neighbors, because I have liquor bottles in front of my house, I have garbage in front of my house, and I have noise starting at 6:15 a.m. where I was told it's 7 a.m., going till 8:30 at night, and I was told it's 7 p.m. So these are just all things that you all, as you know, who are going to be going through what I've gone through for 3 years, we really need to work as an adjoined, commission and council and good neighbors to make sure this works out for everybody. Because you all know, no offense meant, nobody's really excited about going through this again. But traffic is an issue. Marsh Lake Road, yeah, it's not in very good condition, but you all moved out to Victoria because you wanted to move to the country. Do you want Marsh Lake Road to be a 4-lane road with a median where a ball goes in the road and your kids are at the park and gets hit by a car because there's nowhere to go? No, that's not what we want. I know we're working through that, but I really think that we need to look at these access points. We need to limit our construction. We need to make it safe for everybody living there. And to address the question about the access road going through the Lot 7 on Marsh Lake Road, it is a wetland. I abut the creek. I live in the log home right on the creek. And the Johnson farm, or now Jeremy's farm, it's all wetland and wet down there. So a road, you are correct, sir, would not be able to happen because it would sink. So again, just want, as a voice of experience living through it, I think we just need to take a deep breath and decide what's the best way to go about doing this for everybody living out there to make sure that we're all good and we love living here and we want to stay living here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So Ben, would it be unusual from an enforcement standpoint to upgrade our enforcement in that area? I mean, having, the sheriff's deputies or whoever controls the traffic comes in, gives you a plan or reviews it with the builders and sets up a program that says, hey, this many violations, we're going to be watching it, or we're going to add some stop signs, and then have it a fine-based deal. I mean, to slow that traffic down and the garbage. And I admit, I walked that road too, and I've hunted that road for years, and it's a garbage pit now. It's out the window type deal. I think some enforcement has to be used because we're continually having problems on that road, even though we put do not enter, no construction traffic. That means nothing to those guys. And I just think there's something else we can provide as a city to help the citizens deal with the increased construction and what's going to be resident traffic.
Yep. I would say some of the more recent developments, and I've used Lake Town 9th as an example, where had new subdivision that went into an existing neighborhood that had been there for several years. that all the residents there had also been concerned with what does construction traffic start to mean for however long it takes to build out these lots. So we worked pretty diligently with Lennar before that project started to identify here's the primary routes that we want everyone to use in and out of them. We wrote it into our development agreement, and now it still happens because, as you can imagine, when building or home one might get built by a slightly different set of subcontractors, even if they work for the same company, than home two. So every time building trades change, you're subject to someone not necessarily knowing what everyone's agreed to. But the nice thing that's worked out when we have it in that agreement, if I get the complaint or someone else on city staff gets the complaint, we contact the developer that we've now had this very purposeful plan put together, and very shortly we have everyone notified that needed to be notified to have corrections changed. Yes, sometimes even though we've put this good plan in place, there are changes that occur because people are people, and we address them as they come. I would hope, as I mentioned earlier, as we get through final plat and construction plan review of kind of the majority of this project, that we can come up with an effective plan, and that can get walked through when this project would come forward to Planning Commission and Council in the future.
And of course, the public would be invited to that so they understand the traffic plan and the management of it at that time.
Correct.
Okay, I mean, every contractor, every builder has access to every employee they have, or every subcontractor. It's called a text or an email. It's so easy to send an email to them and say, this is your access to this point. If you do not use this access, you will be removed, asked to leave the site after 2 or 3 times. I've been on multiple construction sites for 30 years, and there's an entrance. You don't do that, you won't be on the job long. So that's something I think that really has to be enforced by the contractors, builders, and developers going forward.
Public hearing is still open. Is there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you. Other discussion?
Not really. I guess I'd ask Ben, as far as the 2 product lines go, why was there 2 developers in just the one block? What brought that up? Maybe I missed that at an earlier meeting or something. Why just one block is being developed by Country Joe Homes?
It'd be better spoken to from the developer or the 2 builders.
We have 2 builders in here. Pulte wanted a different type of a lot product at a little bit different price point, and the lot and block on the east side are all kind of more higher end amenity lots overlooking the wetlands. So Country Joe, who's more custom, wanted to participate in those lots.
Okay.
And they're both here to talk about their products if you have any questions for them.
Thank you.
Is there anything with the Pulte product, is there anything significantly different than what's been developed in the other developments as far as style or
I'd
sizing?
probably overgeneralize it. We might have their building rep come up and maybe can speak a little bit more specifically to what's different between kind of this line of their homes from what they've already done.
I'm Jameson Kohout with Pulte. I do land acquisition for them. Specifically, this is just kind of an R2 style home. It's narrower and deeper. Same content basically as what we have on Lakeside. It just accommodates these narrower lots.
Okay. So,
It's really not much different in terms of the livability or the product pricing or quality.
And it's, I don't want to speak for you, but it's also fair to say that even though all of these homes are represented as having 2-car garages, some of the lots will accommodate a 3rd car, and you would intend to provide the 3rd car.
So there's 73 lots that we're purchasing. Only 12 of them would be restricted to a 2-car. So that's specifically what we were targeting is, we want to have 3-car garages, homes that are roughly the same size as the Lakeside Estate type properties. But because of the way it laid out, there were 12 lots that only accommodate 2-car.
all right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So then I'm assuming the 16,000 square foot lot, the largest one, the maximum size zone, is on the Country Joe side. Those will be all larger lots.
I actually think it's one of the first lots that are being requested for final plat in that.
Oh,
first
okay,
block.
oh. That
Those are
includes that,
all
too.
80-foot wide lots, minimum to be consistent with the adjoining plat of Wasserman Lake Woods.
Across the street.
Yep.
All right, that makes sense.
So Ben, this having been, I think this is our first official review of and to kind of
It
put the
is.
new R2 zone to the test, right?
Yeah.
That makes it a little more straightforward, but I was just curious that if through that process you've any lessons learned or any particular challenges in terms of sort of meeting those newly defined benchmarks?
I'm sure I would be selfish and say it was much easier, but Matt may have a slightly different feel as the engineer that had to work within these new parameters. Generally, I think the nice thing that, from my perspective, I saw is we were looking to accommodate a slightly smaller single-family home type. That was exactly what the developer and the builders were also looking to accommodate, and this district worked out where it can accommodate with some flexibility for how big those homes end up being and some other amenities on those lots that, even being smaller, can still look at things like patios and other site improvements that homeowners generally want without being just a small lot that accommodates a massive house. So I think in terms of intent of why did we create kind of this new smaller district, I think this is a good reason why we were able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And don't ask Matt to get up and say otherwise, because we'll take his nodding as agreeing.
I was contemplating it, but we can leave it at that. But certainly feedback is welcome as we.
I'll give both. Generally, Ben's right. I mean, it's been, it's as an engineer, it's really nice to work within a solid set of rules versus a PUD where you're kind of guessing what does the city really want, what fits here. So having an R2 zoning that worked for these products was great. And we came in early, and our lots that we had shown were just a little bit different. We had a little bit different side setbacks. We ended up losing one lot, but the staff's been just great to work with. It was a pretty smooth process considering it was a brand new zoning district. And the zoning obviously works out for this project and then for these home products. So we're pleased with the district for sure. So
Good. Well, I think one of the primary goals, as we discussed it at the commission and the council level, was, more clarity and more predictability, both from the developer side, engineering side, as well as the community and the resident side. So hopefully we're moving in the right direction there. So appreciate the feedback. I did have one other question, which had to do with access. The one question by one of the residents about current access that exists across the street on Lakeside Drive, but thinking about adding 87 additional homes, it's safe to assume that that's a lot more people potentially seeking access outside of this immediate development, right? Whether it's to access the network of trails and sidewalks, or the school and adjoining neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything from and we've got sidewalks on both sides of the streets throughout the development, right?
Correct.
But I'm thinking about like the crosswalks now at Lakeside Drive at the two intersections.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that
Yeah, from
we
a
should
staff
consider?
perspective, particularly with the pedestrian crossings, and we know that right now the west intersection of Woods and Lakeside Drive is a bus stop that we've talked at a staff level about how do we stripe that to make it a more defined pedestrian crossing. Today there are no block striping across that road. Those are some things that we've talked about looking to implement. A lot of it has to do with what changes, what happens once that Lakeside Drive construction into Lake Town and towards the elementary school is done. Because we assume not that every kid walks to school necessarily, but people, out after school is out that want to go either to the park or walk some of the trails, that there might be different movements than what we'd see today around Lakeside Drive itself. But something that we're certainly cognizant of and trying to put a plan together, even looking at doing a traffic study shortly after that connection's made, just to see how many trips are going one way up or down Lakeside Drive. If everyone continues to use, that lives in, Lakeside Estates and Wasserman Lake Woods, are they still coming to and from their homes via that paved portion of Marsh Lake Road, or are some of those trips now using that connection over towards the elementary school?
And my sense is that it's not just car traffic that's picking up, but also pedestrian traffic around the neighborhoods, and not only with this number of new homes in development getting out onto the trail system or whatnot, but we're also creating an increasingly attractive park that's central to a pretty dense neighborhood. So I'd imagine the number of families from the existing adjacent neighborhoods are going to increase that are trying to cross that street and
Correct.
at some key points. So it doesn't sound like this is necessarily the venue to address that, but maybe good feedback to take back for city consideration
Correct.
with other studies. Okay. Any other comments or questions, or anyone care to form a motion?
Just to clarify, the first motion that we're looking for relates to the preliminary plat and rezoning request. And then we have a related request for final plat that I have on subsequent slides in a separate resolution of recommendation.
Yeah, we'll break those up. That's good. So with regard to the resolution, Ben, I think you highlighted some of the conditions, or I guess you highlighted all the conditions. You got them up on screen now.
Yeah, so a lot of them very standard. I'd say the only thing that's changing is now we're not dealing with PUDs, so just looking for the project to continue to conform with that R2 zoning designation. Outlot A and C being dedicated to the city for, that's where we have some of that stormwater management and some wetland buffers and such. Outlot B was the area for that park expansion, so parkland dedication. Outlots D and E, let me go back to the plat because I didn't talk about outlot D. There's a small little wedge of a piece that adjoins what could be future lots on that adjacent property. So outlot D would be retained by the developer to be considered as part of future development that could occur. And then outlot E, you can see the general shape of that project. That's the upland area on the far side of the wetland that isn't accessible today with utilities or road infrastructure. That would also be retained by the developer or whoever they would sell it to see developed in the future when the adjoining properties start to have some of those critical infrastructure pieces available.
And with regard to outlot B, with the park being deeded to the city, I assume that would be disclosed in any developers' agreements with the buyers, so that because that's not currently funded and the timing is uncertain.
Correct. We do a letter of awareness in all of our development agreements that ends up getting passed along to new home buyers. That would be, a lot of these conditions would end up being translated into that letter of awareness.
Okay. One minor typo I happen to notice on our version of the recommendation is item number 2. I think the word
Instead of conform.
conform instead of confirm.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, if we're all done discussing, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 17-7, a resolution recommending approval of a rezoning and preliminary plat for the Meadows of Wasserman Lake as submitted by Golden Valley Land Company, LLC, for property PID 650-260-300 with the conditions as noted.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you all for your feedback. And Ben, this will move forward to the council.
Correct. It'll be on the June 26th, so next Monday's city council meeting.
Sounds
And
good.
the other aspect, the next item there is that Wasserman Lake Woods second edition. So I've highlighted those 8 lots that are on the south side of Lakeside Drive that are being requested for that final plat. And then the final plat was also attached, just identifying those 8 lots. There is another sheet of that final plat that identifies kind of the remainder of the property being Outlot A. And as described in the conditions set forth for the final plat, Outlot A being retained by the developer, and you've seen kind of the intent of what Outlot A ends up translating into with future development that would get approved under a separate final plat for the Meadows of Wasserman Lake in the future.
So as a matter of protocol or process, so this is being called the second edition. When the final plat comes for the previous,
I
that,
believe it will actually be under the new name of Meadows of Wasserman Lake. The only reason this is using an existing name of the adjoining property just on the other side of the street. Also
Okay.
been done by the same development group.
got it. So it's.
Preliminary plat is the difference between Wasserman Lake Woods first edition and the proposed second edition, but we're generally talking about lots that are of similar size, served by the same street.
So the preliminary plat for Meadows of Wasserman Lake included the approval of this.
These 8 lots.
These
That's
eight-
why
these
this
8
final
lots.
Plat approval has to follow approval from the recommendation from this group and the final approval of the preliminary plat from council before they can approve this final plat.
Okay, got it. I didn't mean to confuse that more than necessary,
I
but
talked about
Still
calling
confusing.
Matt and saying, can we just call it the first edition of Meadows? But it ultimately won't matter. No one will notice that the name change is different. But procedurally, you have to approve the preliminary plat before you can approve the final plat here.
okay. Any comments or questions that we didn't already touch on?
I don't think so.
No public hearing associated with this since we're in final plat, just moving forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and move that we approve resolution number 17-8, a resolution recommending approval of a final plat for Wasserman Lake Woods second edition as submitted by Golden Valley Land Company LLC with the conditions noted. Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. Again, I assume that'll move forward like you just described at the June city council meeting.
Correct.
All right, so next we'll move on to the next item under new business, which is item number D, Hill Point, Vanderlinde property, preliminary plat, including public hearing and rezoning.
Thank you. So similar to the project we just walked through, we're at the rezoning preliminary plat stage for this project. Sketch plat was actually reviewed about the same time as the previous project, so just a couple months ago, by both the Planning Commission and City Council. At that time, at the sketch plat, the developer was considering 3 different concepts that could all have been realized on this project, and what you'll see tonight is the selection of one of those 3 concepts being the larger lot development. And similar to the previous project, this being the first time that you'll see a project that conforms with the new R1 regulations that accommodates kind of the larger lot style development in the city. Property we're talking about, I would say, commonly has been referred to as the Vanderlinde property, but the preliminary plat also includes the adjacent Isabel property. If the commission will recall, when the sketch plat was brought forward, there was a ghost plat shown across the Isabel property for some additional lots that conformed with kind of the large lot concept. the developer and that property owner have worked together to come up with the preliminary plat that you're being presented with consideration for tonight. So you'll see outlined in red is both those two sites just off the northeast corner of the intersection of Bavaria and 86th Street. This just shows the proposed preliminary plat superimposed over that aerial. Again, primary access into the site is the midpoint between Alley Lane and 86th Street, which meets the city's spacing guidelines for access into the property. A right-hand turn lane would be constructed similar to all full access points along Bavaria Road. And then this street could be extended further to the north all the way up to 82nd Street if and when redevelopment opportunities of properties to the north of this were to take place. There are also two private driveways within the project, the first one being just off that immediate access. The existing Vanderlinde home would be retained and served by that private drive, as well as a new lot that's in between the Vanderlinde home and the 8433 Bavaria Road project. The second private driveway serving 3 lots near the north side of this project. You can see the 3 lots that are served by that project. Both private driveways have turnarounds provided at the time of construction of those final lots. The midpoint here does accommodate kind of a hammerhead turnaround to get out of that private drive. From a utility perspective, as noted when this property was brought forward under sketch plat, the existing services for sewer and water are in the adjacent Greenway on the Park development right at the intersection of Alley Lane and Bavaria Road. So you can see those utilities coming into the site. From a sewer perspective, the existing sewer on the other side of the road, gravity cannot be extended to serve this project. So a new lift station would be constructed by the developer located here on lot 1 of block 2. And then the force main is the sewer connection that you're seeing going back to the sanitary manhole in Greenway on the Park. Water main going through the project, but also being set up that it could again be extended for future development to the north of the site, along with the sewer itself. From a stormwater perspective, all of the drainage from the street and the front yards of the homes ends up getting directed to the southwest corner, where they'll have a stormwater management facility very consistent with what they had conceptually shown at the sketch plat phase. Access to that stormwater management facility coming right off Bavaria Road, adjacent to lot 13 of block 2. That also serves as a dual access for a trail extension that's being proposed as part of this plat, extending the existing trail that terminates today on Bavaria Road at 86th Street. That would be extended all the way to the north, adjacent to this property and that existing 8433 site, to get us up to a crossing at Alley Lane, so that we will have that trail connection done as part of this project. Similar to the previous project, this subdivision, both conforming to the R1 regulations as well as those revisions to the landscaping ordinance. You're seeing a landscape buffer along Bavaria Road, which is considered a minor arterial. So the landscaping treatment here is per the requirements in that landscaping and open space section. And then that boulevard tree treatment with at least one tree in the front yard. And then you can also see at least one tree being placed in the rear yard of these lots. Just to give a comparison from the minimum requirements of that new R1 district and how this project relates to them, you can see with all one exception that was just over that 12,000 lot size square footage, all of the rest of the lots were significantly over that 12,000 square feet, and in many cases exceeding a lot of the other minimums that were established in this district. Similar to what had been shown at the concept plan, this is intended to be more of a custom build neighborhood where a buyer could buy a lot and pick their builder, or a builder might end up working with the developer to identify 1 or 2 lots that they want to hold and find buyers to build on them. Very similar to this developer's previous project, Lake Point, that's just off of Carl Cry Lake, where it was also more of a custom build. And occasionally you have one builder that does a couple lots, but it's maybe not more than that today. As proposed, the preliminary plat does conform in entirety to the R1 and other zoning requirements of the city. At this point in time, I'm happy to talk through any other details of the project. We do have representation from the developer here that would, I'm sure, happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Ben.
I see you've made accommodations for cars turning right into the neighborhood. Is there any consideration for cars turning left, a slip lane or anything like that?
Bavaria itself, so if you look from Highway 5 and then all the way down into Chaska, there isn't a single development that has a center turn lane. All of those development and access points have been accommodated with a right turn or a bypass lane to go around kind of that center or stopped movement. Sure. That was part of the consideration. Do we look for a center turn because it was so different than any other access points, either in Victoria or in Chaska? We opted to stick with the treatment that's been done previously for that right turn movement to get pulled off.
Okay. Is the idea that the access for the 8433 property remains as it is, but the potential stub out there is to, at some point in the future, link up with the private drive that's provided?
I think, Terry, you've maybe had more direct conversations with that property owner. I think the intent of setting this up was because we allow for up to 3 homes being served from a private drive, that long-term, should Terry, the developer, today come to some agreement with that property owner to allow that connection to happen now, or just having the ability that long-term it could happen, that was generally the intent, to remove those individual access points out to Bavaria Road.
Okay. And then on that same private drive, did I hear you describe that, so that stub road off the private drive to the...
So it's just a driveway that would extend to that new lot, would be deep enough that it would allow for kind of a 3-point turn as that turnaround in the middle of that private drive.
And the property line is set up to accommodate that, or?
Correct.
Okay. Does that create any gray lines between who's responsible for clearing that portion of the driveway?
We've actually done this on a few other developments, and it's worked out okay. Arbor Woods is probably the one that's most similar to the 2 that are proposed here, and that turnaround was constructed at the time that last house went in, and it is basically treated as a driveway, and it's only in an emergency condition that it ends up getting used by either a fire truck or some larger vehicle.
Okay. So one of the things I appreciate about this process is a little bit unique in terms of how it came to us, and so I actually appreciated that. I think, Terry, your team was thoughtful in terms of looking at a diversity of product sizes, and I know that you gathered feedback from a number of different sources, commission, council, I'm assuming the community and the neighborhoods, and then also market factors. I think there was favorable feedback for all 3 approaches, right? I don't remember anything standing out.
I think the only comments I recall is people at least understanding the villa style product that had been looked at, and a lot of comments about the 80-foot or the larger lot being more consistent with what was surrounding it. I just don't remember there being a ton of discussion about that R2 option or that, 70-foot, was it 60 or 70-foot lot option that had been brought forward as one of the concepts.
Yeah. In some ways, the selected approach seems complementary to many of the other developments that are a little bit more villa-based or smaller homes. Keep options out there. Was there anything that totally tipped it over the scale for you to go this approach? If you don't mind sharing, otherwise I understand if not.
Todd.
It was all Todd.
I'm kidding. Most of the discussion we had in looking at all three was the narrowest product, has issues with it from that density standpoint. Todd brought up, questions of setback and fire separation and that kind of a thing. If we were to bring that back, we would have widened out that setback. But I think in what kind of tipped us over the edge is in talking with most of the neighbors' concern was that anything other than the largest lot model is a little out of context for what's there.
Right.
And I think we had at that same time of hearing that, we also heard that the market needs some larger, more executive size lots. Smaller builders are looking for a handful of lots, and we haven't sold any of these yet, so we don't know if one custom builder may buy all of them, or if it will be a group of 4 or 5 similar to our Lake Point. So we just don't know yet. I appreciate Ben putting up the pictures of custom home, but again, we just don't know. But the size of the lot offers us a lot of flexibility. 3-car garages would be expected. Price points are $500,000 to $700,000 with this size and the cost that goes into this project. Make a quick point on the new R1. We were surprised with the amount of landscaping required, but again, with what we were proposing, we needed a good, strong entrance, and we needed a good, strong berming and separation landscaping. So it worked out and didn't cause an excessive cost to us. It was kind of part of something we had already planned on doing, but it was surprising to see the amount that was required as a part of that. But again, in this case, it fit well. So
Yeah.
I know a landscaper that can help you with that.
yeah. We did have a couple conversations with our neighbor that you had asked, Jeff, about Jason Stevens, and we felt the right thing to do was to serve him for his long-term purpose. So that private driveway that we will be putting in will be extended to his property line. Sewer, water, everything is brought to his property line. He doesn't have any intention to split it now, but if he were to split that in the future, it would be easy to provide access to him and take him off of the Bavaria Road then.
Sure. Speaking of that relationship, do you feel good about the support you're getting from the neighbors, especially those 3 total that are part of this development now? In terms of, are there any buffers or landscaping or things like that should be considered between those existing lots and some of the new development?
On the east side of the Bavaria Road?
No, within development.
Isabel and Vanderlinde
Yeah.
properties.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Isabel are here. They're a part of the plat.
Mm-hmm.
They've seen it. They're actually a kind of co-developer in this process with us. Any questions you have, you could ask them. But I think we've kind of well thought out the landscaping between Stevens and the Isabel and ours. The only comment that came up at the sketch was with our new access onto Bavaria Road, the potential headlights coming out onto the back of one of the greenway on the park neighbors. I met with him. We walked his berm, talked about strategy of putting some more additional trees there, and what came out of that is the design for our entrance with the landscape median. That was maybe a better spot to try to block some trees with future canopy and the entrance monument versus putting more trees up on his own property. He has several bird feeders, and it's well developed up on his berm, and he didn't want to put any more landscaping up there. So if this works, it'll suffice. We would revisit that if there was an issue with that.
Sure. Thank you. I don't think I had any other questions this time.
Yeah, I don't believe I do either. Looks well thought out. I like the larger lot size. It's definitely a product that is needed. I've had builders comment that to me, just ones I see through my daily work. And so I like it overall. It's well thought out, and if all the neighbors are in agreement of what's going on, that's the best thing for once, where that makes it a lot easier to move forward. So, thank you.
Well, that's a good segue to opening up the public hearing. So I think I'll go ahead and do that at this time. I'll open the public hearing. If anybody here has any comments, questions, or things to add to the discussion, we welcome you to do so. We just ask you step to the podium, state your name and address, and share your thoughts. No? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. Any more discussion, questions?
Just, maybe I missed it, but 8433, if that lot, when and if it was sold, would this development move into that, or would that be sold as a separate development, or?
We don't have any site control over that. They would have to plat that if they split it. Well, they may be able to do a minor subdivision, I'm not sure.
Yeah, they'd have to come back for some approval from the city if it was going to be less than just the property as it exists today.
Okay.
And there's no known timing. There's no indication from the property owner today that they have any intent right now for that to take place.
Okay, thank you.
In that regard, we couldn't force them to be a part of a homeowners association or anything like that either. They kind of
right.
stand on their own.
Thank you.
No questions for me, just a comment very similar to what Todd had mentioned. I like the larger lot sizes in there. I think that's really fitting to the area, and looks like it was well thought out with the neighbors, and I think it's great. So,
Ben, anything to highlight with regard to the conditions that you've outlined thus far?
Actually, very similar to the preliminary plat for the previous project that we reviewed. So again, talking about a lot of the same checks and balances systems, just identifying in this case, outlots are a little bit different purpose here. We're not acquiring any parkland as part of this project. There is one outlot that cannot be served with utilities from the lots being developed here. It's on the other side of a wetland that would be best retained by the developer, which is what it's proposed to be. So just spelling some of those things out just so it's clear moving forward and for future reference as to what the intent of those different properties are. The one property the city is getting is where the existing wetlands and the stormwater management facilities are. Otherwise, really looking at that trail construction to satisfy a lot of the parkland dedication requirements, but probably a needed link from a community standpoint to see that connection be made up front and connect existing neighborhoods that can't otherwise serve kind of that regional connection down to Chaska very easily.
Okay, with that, I will go ahead and make a motion that we approve resolution number 17-9. A resolution recommending approval of a rezoning and preliminary plat for the Hill Point as submitted by Hartman Communities for property PIDS 6501-80330 and 6501-80200 with the conditions as noted. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Again, I'm assuming this will go for council at the June meeting.
That's correct, June 26th, next Monday.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to Well, we've stricken item E from the new business, so that's been tabled for the night.
Well, I was asking for it to be tabled, so I'd just like a motion from the commission to have it tabled and then readdressed at the next meeting on July 10th.
Fair enough. I'll go ahead and move that we table agenda item under new business, item E, to the next planning commission meeting currently scheduled for July 10th. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, July 11th. The council meeting is July 10th. Back-to-back meetings. July 11th is the next council or planning commission meeting.
Do we need to back up and restate that? Okay.
I think we can note it in the
So
minutes.
July 11th it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is the council meeting updates.
You need a second? Did somebody second it?
Who seconded it?
Oh.
Thank you. Council meeting updates. So, been 2 meetings since the last time that we got together. The most recent, June 12th, we actually had a workshop between the council, and we had representatives from Southwest Transit here. We did record that meeting, so if you're interested just to see what that dialogue was like, I'd highly suggest just getting in and watching about that 45-minute discussion that they had. A lot of it was more information on where Southwest Transit is today in terms of their offerings, and then having the council have a discussion about, what are these opportunities, how, as a non-member today, can we think about how some of the things that Southwest Transit offers might benefit us? What are those steps that we would need to take to, if we wanted to join as a community, that we could go through? It was a really good dialogue about just the whole process and just kind of thinking long-term about what other things would be beneficial to residents that Southwest Transit can provide. We'll probably be getting into that discussion a little bit more in the comprehensive planning process. So as we think about transportation, another topic we'll come back to. So definitely recommend just watching that workshop portion of the meeting that's available on the city's website. Other big things that this commission would probably be interested in. We did have a presentation from the Lions Club about doing improvements to the existing shelter at Lions Park. Generally met with a lot of support and appreciation, and the Lions stepping forward to improve an existing shelter. And I know that they're looking at, they being the Lions, are looking at formalizing and finalizing some of those plans. You'd end up seeing as a commission a site plan and building materials, as well as we'd likely host a neighborhood meeting because it does involve converting what's today kind of an open shelter part of that building into an enclosed condition, or the ability to enclose it so it could support more year-round activities there. So getting a neighborhood meeting together just to bring a little bit more awareness of what changes look like aesthetically, but also functionally for that facility. So look to see that in the coming meetings. Otherwise, I don't know that there was anything specific in that meeting that this group would have either heard about or have as kind of an upcoming thing. The May 22nd council meeting, we did have a moment of silence for those of you that have been around the community and know Randy Miller. Full name was John Randall Miller, but always went by Randy. Did a lot for the community in terms of participating in events through the VBA and even on his own, but things like Classic Car Night, Volksfest, a lot of things that he had a specific hand in bringing about to the community, and not to forget the centennial sculpture that's just off of Bayfront Park on Steiger Lake Lane here in downtown, just couple 100 feet away from this building. He passed away from cancer and certainly has been missed, so had a moment of silence to remember Randy before that meeting started. Other things that had been talked about there, that was the night that the zoning ordinance changes were reviewed and approved by City Council, so all the residential zoning districts as well as the landscaping and open space ordinance had been reviewed and approved by the council. Of particular note amongst all of the zoning changes, I know that Councilmember Vogt had brought up a lot of discussion about the landscaping and buffering along primary roadways in the city, and got consensus from the rest of the council to look for additional analysis from staff at what potential additional revisions could be made to the landscaping and open space section, particularly along those county roadways, those busy thoroughfares. Just wants to make sure that what got approved is the best that we have, best foot forward, so to speak, in terms of how we think about those roadways that may expand over time. I mean, today a lot of our county roadways are 2-lane, but in the case that they might get bigger, the separation from the physical paved roadway and some of those homes was something he at least questioned should get looked at, particularly because from a right-of-way, so the area that is entirely controlled by the county, they vary in width. They're not all the same width, so that distance from how far you are from a road is different. So from a staff perspective, we'll look into getting some additional information back to both the Planning Commission and the council and see if additional revisions there are needed. I would say in general...
Ben, can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Was that in the context of not only the setback distance for homes or future homes in that area, but was it also about reserving the right-of-way for that potential expansion so that there's increased, that doesn't get too tight over time as things expand?
Yeah, I think that was part of the concern that Councilmember Vogt had started with, but it was really just that thinking about even if we reserve the amount of right-of-way, at some point in time, the pavement condition may end up getting closer to properties than how they've been today. And does that change kind of that physical separation between automotive traffic and where people live? And he just wants to understand, do we have the right conditions, thinking through what, say, a 4-lane road might mean? Is the buffer that we are thinking about in passing that recent ordinance the same thing, that kind of buffer that we want if it's a 4-lane condition or something closer to properties?
Thank you.
In general, the residential sections, I think, had a good dialogue about all of them. The council generally was supportive and appreciative that the Planning Commission had spent so much time to make sure that they were kind of right fit ordinances that could realize our comprehensive plan and allow the types of development that we're seeing being sought in the market and what we're being presented with even more recently. So pass along the thank you that it took some time, but I think where we ended up was a really good foot forward for the community.
And to comment on that, Ben, I'd say 90% of the heavy lifting was done by staff, so we appreciate that, because you brought a product back to us that was common sense, straightforward, and was easy for us to review, I feel. So thank you for that.
Good.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Otherwise, I don't know that there was anything else specifically discussed by the council that would be specifically related to any of the work that the commission does. But as always, all of the videos, or if you're just an audio person, all of that's available on our website, so feel free to check out any of that information as well. That's what I have for you on.
Appreciate the update. Tells us what to go look for, so thank you. Moving on then, Item number 5 on the agenda is miscellaneous. Did anybody have anything to add tonight?
The only thing that I would, again, just to keep everyone up to speed on the comprehensive plan, we did have our first pop-up meeting. We had a booth during the first Classic Car Night, June 14th. There was also concerts in the park, and then Discover Victoria Day, which had traditionally been a month previous at the Victoria Rec Center. Ended up being a really good event itself. It was surprising, though, for the people that came by and took time to comment how many weren't Victoria residents. So I think it was probably a good effort just to see what kind of people are we engaging with at some of those public events, but certainly we'll need to do a few more events and pop-ups to really engage our community specifically. And I do know that we will have a community survey available in addition to that interactive map that we've talked about previously, the social pinpoint, continuing to layer in those areas and ways that people can get engaged in the process. And then this summer we'll also be starting to develop some concepts based upon any input and feedback we've had to date, with the intent that we would get to a point of presenting those to the community and looking for specific feedback that might be different than what had been specifically envisioned in the 2030 comprehensive plan. So more things to keep thinking about. If you haven't already gotten on the website and reviewed that page, please do so if you have questions in the interim before we have a specific discussion here at the Planning Commission about what some of those potential changes are and some of the topics that'll get tackled with the comprehensive plan process. Feel free to contact Aaron or I.
I just had 2 quick comments to expand on that. One is that I actually think that's interesting feedback with regard to non-Victoria residents participating in our events. I just think that's a good reminder to bring back to the long-term comprehensive plan committee that it's not so egocentric just about the residents, but it'd be interesting as time goes on to sort of keep a pulse on that in terms of how much participation we're getting beyond the community. There's some value there.
So Ben, one more comment or question, I guess. Was there any more discussion, or has there been any more discussion about the Victoria for a Lifetime Committee as far as moving forward or how that's going to operate?
Sure. I guess that topic was on the agenda for the May 22nd meeting. For those that don't know, I guess all of the committee ended up resigning. We had several members of the mayor and council that have reached out to those people just to get a little bit more background and feedback. But the general consensus from the council as that topic has been brought up is that there's probably a needed time off from that committee. Certainly wanted to keep trying to engage the people that had served there in the future, but looking maybe the first part of this fall to try to either establish reconvening the people that had served on that committee if they're willing, or going through the process of trying to find new people that would be interested in serving on that type of committee.
One other comment I was just going to add with regard to the social pinpoint website that Ben mentioned. What I've learned through the feedback with the consultant is that there is merit to like how many likes certain comments are getting. So it's easy to go to that social pinpoint site, which Ben has just now pulled up on the screen, and think, oh, okay, somebody already has me covered with that comment. But as they're compiling all this data, which you can see there's a ton of comments, there is weight being given to, you know, how many likes or how many comments are sort of building on a particular comment. So if there's already things established, I think it has value to, you know, hit that like button, because that gives additional emphasis to it. I just thought it was worth noting to this group in terms of how the data is being
Absolutely.
used, and it's helping, I think, narrow the discussion on some of the most important issues to the broadest number of people.
As much as you're welcome to continue to comment that we need a grocery store, I think that generally is well represented from the comments we've received.
True.
Any headway in that?
Anything else miscellaneous?
Nope.
Hearing none, I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Enjoy your evening.